So I just want to start by introducing this. I think this quote of Thomas Jefferson is always, I think, extremely compelling for me, and I put it out for our panelists to consider as they were preparing their remarks. Thomas Jefferson saying something to the effect that an enlightened citizenry is indispensable for the proper functioning of a republic, which prompted us to ponder what do Illinois residents know about the state's problems, other than the type of horse race analogy that we always see. It's Madigan versus Growner, or some sort of good versus evil, which is as much as sometimes the daily press gets into. But these two individuals have some very, very important insights into the budget issue, and please welcome John and Jamie in sharing them with us today. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll go first because the program says I go first. Mike Gelder is an important guy to me. Is one of my main guys because once, not only the fact that he used to coach girls softball league we were in, but back in 1993 they grabbed I guess that was in financial. And they grabbed me and said, son, you're going on the editorial board of the Chicago Tribune. And they even took me down to the Chicago Club, let me shake a few hands. It's like joining the College of Cardinals. But this was back when the editorial board was a little more toned down and open-minded than it perhaps is today, some would argue. But anyway, I was replacing man for woman, a lady by the name of Joan Beck, who some of you may remember. Everybody knows about Lois Willie and some of the other female pioneers in Chicago journalism, but Joan Beck certainly fits that description. In fact, she was a God's honest healthcare writer, and she wrote a book once called "Is My Baby All Right?" with a New York physician that no one had heard of by the name of Virginia Apgar, who had come up with a way to assess the viability and energy level of newborn babies. Of course, that's now the Apgar. But anyway, Joan Beck was the real deal, and I was replacing her. So there was obviously a big hole on the board to write about healthcare issues. I was the urban affairs guy, planning, zoning, housing, but I just kind of inherited that. It helped also that my wife of 40 years is also a community health nurse, teaches that to young student nurses at Loyola University, and I learned quite a bit, at least at the breakfast table. So anyway, you just heard the beginnings of a laundry list of services that are being unfunded, defunded, inadequately funded. So I'm not going to go and add to that list with tales of woe about adult dental care, about renal dialysis for non-citizens, community support for services for the disabled, Meals on Wheels, sudden infant death syndrome, training for new parents. I'm not going to do that because we also have someone who's a lot closer to the legislative process to my right who can go into that with some detail. But what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the news business in general and the problem that you face getting your message out to the public through a rapidly changing journalism field. It's no longer news that the news business is also in a state of crisis. The business model that long ago supported metropolitan daily newspapers is dissolving at a rate much faster than anyone could have imagined just 2 or 3 years ago. Knowledgeable reporters, beat reporters, expert reporters, and editors are being laid off right and left as the papers try to bring expenses in line with fast disappearing revenues. And much the same thing is happening at a slower pace in the newsrooms of our local TV in radio stations, which are also losing their audience to various other forms of entertainment, from the iPod to TiVo and the internet and Netflix and whatnot. The TV stations are expanding their news slot, some say, but I think you're much more likely to get a good recipe or a diet regimen than you are to learn about the state's budget crisis with that extra time. So how do you deal with this? Let me throw out 3 things I think that come to mind that you can be doing as a minimum. First off, make sure your organization has a press-friendly website. That would be one that has all your press releases, especially the one you issued just this morning. When I left the Tribune full-time in 2000, I went out into to your world, the not-for-profit world, and at the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I was sort of stunned at the lag it often takes between when something happens and when our website responded to it. So that was part of my job there was getting a more press-friendly website, a website that has all of the significant speeches and presentations that your boss or your ED has made, that has all the reports and studies that your organization has produced or that you want to call attention with. Let's say you want to refer to some think tank in Washington that's done something that you want your viewers to notice. Now that we have fewer reporters, and with the surviving reporters having less time to research their stories, they are as likely to punch up Google and then go to your website to do their research as to pick up the phone and actually call you. But reporters, the good ones at least, still do make phone calls. So include on your website the contact information, not just for your communications staff, but for your ED and your vice presidents, board people, whoever that you trust to speak for your organization. And I should add that you should have in advance a number of people who are sort of on the same wavelength who you trust to make, say, reaction statements over the phone to news reporters. The news cycle moves too fast for you to be requiring internal clearances before key people are allowed to talk to reporters. Secondly, not only that, but you and your senior operating officers need to actively develop relationships with those few remaining reporters who actually cover your beat and what you do. Insofar as there still are reporters covering complex issues like health care, make it your job to find out who they are, take them to lunch, buy them coffee, or let them buy coffee if they're ethically persnickety about that sort of thing. Certainly return their phone calls. Seek them out. Get yourself a Mike Gelder, as I did when I was in a panic back in '93, trying to figure what an employer mandate was or what insurance theory is. Seek these reporters out at conferences and seminars like this one today. Also, you can become a readily available and reliable source for those reporters. Okay, so you need a press-friendly website. You need source relationships with reporters who cover your issues. And thirdly, I'd say you need to streamline your internal lines of communication so you can respond and react to external events quickly with reaction statements, with letters to the editor, even with op-eds, any and all of which can be posted as soon as possible on your own websites. The letters to the editor at the Sun-Times or the Tribune or the Cranes may shoot down your letter, but at least you can put it up on your website and says, this is what we submitted for publication. Ask yourself, can my organization turn around a letter to the editor in 24 hours? Or an engagingly written op-ed within 48 to 72 hours? If the answer is no, then you probably need to get on that. Talk to your boss or your executive director, appeal to his or her sense of vanity if that's what it takes. Tell them you want to make them a star by having a reaction thing on the front page or on the evening's news. One of my early victories at the Metropolitan Planning Council was being able to anticipate what the news was going to be. The 2000 census, I think it was going to come out, the following week. So, I mean, we knew within a couple of percentage points what that census was going to say. So we had Mary Sue Barrett ready with a statement about what it meant, the declining populations in certain parts of the county and increases in others, and what that portended for the future of regional planning. I've gotten the hook note here, so let me finish with something. The word politics was mentioned earlier by one of our speakers, and I'm sure it'll be mentioned again. And I know a lot of you are from 501c3 organizations that are prohibited by law and the Internal Revenue Service Code from participating in politics. But one column I wrote about the state's fiscal impasse earlier, actually a year ago, February. It ran something like this. I was reacting to Father Pfleger from St. Sabina was organizing some of the first demonstrations around the State of Illinois building here in Chicago, the for sale State of Illinois building, I guess. And I wrote, while I sympathize with the Reverend Michael Pfleger and others whose state funds for youth activities and child care services are being yanked as non-essential, I'd also call their attention to last November's election tally sheet. In the Southside 17th Ward, where Father Pfleger's St. Sabina Parish truly does God's work, a grand total of 13,000 showed up to vote for governor. Fully 96% of them voted for Pat Quinn, but 2 years ago, President Barack Obama pulled 21,000 votes from that same ward. So roughly half as many people showed up to vote for Pat Quinn as previously voted for Barack Obama. And then finally, I actually started this out with a quote. Maybe it'll get our juices going here. This is a quote from H.L. Mencken, the great bard of Baltimore, a journalist that's sort of in the pantheon that we look up to. Anyway, he said, "Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard." Thank you.
Well, and I heartily second all the points John just made about your website and reaching out to reporters. Those are some very great points. I'm kind of nodding along with a lot of them. Just to let you know a little bit about myself and my background, I came to State House reporting through the Public Affairs Reporting Program at UIS. I was a State House Bureau Chief for Illinois issues, and now I'm editing, so I'm a little more removed from what's going on in the State House. I'm not writing as much as I used to, but when I do, I'm focusing on the budget. If you're not familiar with Illinois issues, we were a public policy print magazine for 40 years. Very recently, we switched to a digital-only format, so now we're putting out an in-depth story once a week. You can sign up for our digital newsletter if you're interested. We've also merged with the public radio station in Springfield, WUIS, so we're doing radio reports, in-depth radio reporting as well. So, what do folks know about the budget? I think it varies very widely and probably correlates most closely with how much people feel the budget is affecting them personally. And, I want to talk to you a little bit today about how the media covers the budget, why we cover it that way, how we could do a better job in some ways, and what that means for you, and how you might be involved in that process. So how does the media portray budgetary issues? There's a really wide variety out there. Every reporter has their different style. Every publication kind of has their different priorities and focus. But we do notice, especially lately with the current conflict, that the focus can really become on, the personalities and the horse race and the political part of what's happening. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but first and foremost, it's probably this, that media outlets are, for the most part, businesses who have to sell their product and turn a profit. And the horse race sells with readers, listeners, and viewers, who subsequently draw advertisers. Why is that? It's mainly because what do we care about? We care about people, and we care about narratives. And the horse race is interesting to readers because there are people at the center of it, interesting personalities, and interesting conflicts. And that's not to say that the conflict is not important. We bemoan this covering of the political fight and the personalities, but readers need to understand how they play into the politics of shaping the budget. And it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We are doing people a disservice if we give the impression that it does. But sometimes when we focus so heavily on the conflict, we start to gloss over what's at stake. So one way to address this is to shift the narrative and the people we're focusing on. The best way you can do that is to illustrate for readers how the budget affects them personally. Sometimes you can't get there, so the second best way to do that is to tell them the stories of who it does impact and let them know about the ripple effects in their communities. Once you can make a budget story relatable, people are a little more willing to stick with you for the nuts and bolts of how things work and learn more about the budgetary process. So what can reporters do beyond making stories more relatable to do a better job of reporting on the budget? One key thing is to look back. Our budget and spending is full of all kinds of quirks. One person's special fund for special interests is another person's hard-fought compromise that resolved a contentious issue. A court order that ties the state's hands when it comes to budget flexibility is also a mechanism to make sure a vulnerable group's constitutional rights are protected. Understanding these different views and the background as to why things work the way they do helps reporters understand budgets beyond the simple math and helps you have a holistic view when changes are proposed. It's also something I'm convinced you can spend a lifetime doing. Secondly, one big thing I think reporters can do to improve reporting on the budget is to look outside the general revenue fund. The state has hundreds of funds, but we tend to just focus on GRF as the state's checkbook. But costs shift in and out of the general revenue fund every year. And anytime someone is claiming savings in a department, that's kind of the first place I look is where else did they maybe go? Or are they just shifted to another fund? Is it really a cut? Or is it just moving off one ledger to the other? This is one way I think reporters really shape the narrative around the budget. We tend to only count GRF as the state budget. And so it's easy to shift costs around and make things, look a little different than they may actually be. One of the reasons why we do this is because it's impossible for one reporter to track what's going on in all the state funds. There are some good, if you're interested in learning more about this, resources out there. I would recommend the Fiscal Futures Project at the Institute for Government and Public Affairs. They've done a great job of kind of laying out what's going on with all the state funds outside of GRF and explaining why it's really difficult to track how the state budget works year over year. Another thing that reporters can do to have strong budget coverage is to make clear that a change here will affect something else over here. That seems pretty simple, but when we're doing these stories telling someone's personal experience with the budget and that this cut is having a hardship on someone, we also need to make clear that the state doesn't have infinite dollars. And so we need to lay out the situation. In the current situation, and basically since the recession, when one group gets their funding, it often means someone else is missing out. And we need to be sure to kind of have that, broader approach of explaining what the current budget situation is. This sounds a little boring, but I think reporters should be less afraid to be repetitive. The same issues come up over and over again in state budget, in state government, and we feel like we've written the same story so many times, but that doesn't mean that our readers, listeners, and viewers remember the last time around, or they may need, a refresher. It's great to do follow-ups. And as all of us know, even though the same issues come up over and over again, there's always some new twist or some new thing that's going on. And I think sometimes we're a little afraid to keep explaining things. Also, I think some of this is probably just our personal vanity. Reporters like to break the story or introduce some new concept that no one has brought up before. So if something has been covered elsewhere, sometimes we don't pay as much attention to it as we should. We say, oh, that story's already been done. And while we don't want to be derivative We need to offer new things to our readers and unique reasons for them to, be interested in what we're doing. We shouldn't just assume they already know about something just because we do. So why else has budgetary coverage changed over the past few years? Some of that gets back to what I said earlier. There's the business model, fewer reporters. John touched on this as well. In the State House bureaus in Illinois, there used to be multiple reporters. Now, largely, it's one reporter in each bureau. In the past, there might be one person focused on the politics, one person more focused on wonkier issues and budget things, or there might be one person who did daily coverage and then one person who got the chance to do a deeper dive and more in-depth coverage. Now it's just one person doing all of those things, with few exceptions. So there's always this fear among reporters and editors, I think, of missing the big political story of the day. For example, until very recently, when he started giving a weekly press conference, if Mike Madigan said something, you damn well better be there to get it. And it's hard to delve into complicated policy issues while you're sticking out leaders' meetings for hours on end and worrying about, am I going to miss the news of the day? So that's made it a lot more difficult, I think. Also, many of the folks who focus solely on state government have moved on in recent years and taken their institutional knowledge elsewhere. So there's been a bit of a changing in the guard. The Springfield Press Corps is looking, for the most part, a bit younger these days than it used to be, and those folks bring different styles, and they're working on building their knowledge as they cover the State House. So what does all of this mean for those of you who might be advocating something or trying to get coverage for your story? Because of the budget impasse, the focus on the budget is very intense right now. So there is, while it's a difficult time, a bit of an opportunity to make your case because people are paying attention like never before. Those of us who cover state government are looking for budget stories right now. It is the story, and especially ones that are a bit different or ones that maybe we haven't heard before, ones that illustrate the on-the-ground impact of the impasse in a way that readers can understand by telling real people's stories. Now is especially a good time to find, getting to wrap it up. Now is especially a good time to find receptive reporters and start cultivating the relationships by presenting yourself as a consistently reliable source of information. And because there are fewer reporters, we don't get out of the State House or our offices as often as we would like. I remember when I started as an intern in the State House thinking, oh, I'm going to be out on the streets and talking to people, and it's not like that at all. You're in the State House pretty much all the time. So if you can help be our bridge to the community and our bridge to people who can tell their stories, that is incredibly helpful. Many reporters are naturally curious people, of course, and we want to understand how things work. Sometimes when session's really hectic, we just need what we need to know for this story. But if a reporter calls you for that, you may want to talk to them about following up when things have calmed down, because usually we would like to have a deeper understanding. And then, make that plan and be sure to remind them about it when session is out. Give them a call. Say, hey, that thing you called me about a couple weeks ago, let's sit down and talk about it a little bit more in depth. They'll probably take you up on that offer. And finally, what can you do to improve budget coverage? Everything kind of comes back to the money, doesn't it? You get what you pay for to some degree. So if you like someone's budget coverage, pay for it. If you like what the Trib's doing or Cranes, or you like what a nonprofit is doing, make a donation. Pay the money to get past that paywall, and that will continue to encourage that coverage that you think is good. Also, give feedback. The process of reporting is more of a two-way process right now than it has ever been. So make sure to reach out to reporters, engage people on social media. You have a lot more voice than you may realize as far as giving feedback to news entities. So, thank you.
All right, well, great. Thank you very much for both your incisive comments as well as keeping us close to on time. There were a couple of quick questions I think that they're worth pondering right now, in addition to the time I hope we'll have with you at the end. First, how has Rounder's approach to media access affected reporting? Why do you think Rounder has taken such an adversarial approach? Is that a question, Jamie, you can answer?
I can talk about that, yeah. So my experience has not been as adversarial as it has been just not getting a lot of response. And I do think, if you're out there trying to shape a message, it leaves a void for information that, you have an opportunity of taking advantage of, because we do have a hard time getting information out of the administration and state agencies, especially during the impasse. We're having, struggling finding out who's getting paid, when, and what's going on. So that information is pretty useful right now because of there being kind of a vacuum of what's coming out of the administration.
And then secondly, this is an issue that's perturbed a lot of us for a while, and that is the growth of the Illinois Policy Institute and its extensive coverage. But they've also now just bought the Illinois Radio Network. How do you think this will affect media coverage on budget issues, and what overall impact does this have as such a ideologically leaning group that produces story after story after story that these short-staffed local papers then just print as news?
Well, it's certainly a local reflection of something that's going on across media nationally, right? I mean, if you want the right-wing interpretation, you go to Fox News, and if you want Rachel Maddow, you go to MSNBC. The one thing, I truncated my presentation a little bit for time, but the one thing I was going to suggest, my wife isn't going to want to hear this, is that you've got to listen to the opponent's point of view. You got to find out what facts they're using, what facts they're twisting, what lies they're telling, if you think they're telling lies, which means, yeah, you got to, I am on the listserv for the Illinois Policy Institute and the Illinois News Network, and yeah, a lot of their stuff puts a smile on my face, but how do you shape your message to counter that sort of thing if you don't even know what they're saying? So put up with it, find out what they're arguing, so you can come up with a rebuttal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really gets back to the question of, what does the public know with the way that news coverage has fragmented, and there being so many options out there. You can really, if you have a certain view, choose to only listen to things and read things that, uphold that view. And so that is pretty difficult for folks that are trying to do very just, unbiased. I view my role as basically an educator of the public, really, trying to stay in the middle and all of that. It's hard because people are less interested in that today, I think, than they are in something that makes them feel good about how they view things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, and we need to move on, but I think that one of the big differences is that I think through 90% of the geography of Illinois, people who read the paper, who are diminishing numbers of them and diminishing numbers of papers for them to read, are getting this sort of ideologically influenced information as objective, because they're reading it in their local papers, and it doesn't get filtered or edited. It's just what that institute wants to put out.
This may be kind of blasphemous coming from a reporter, but I'm less worried about it than some folks are, probably because I grew up in a small town in Illinois and have read small town papers most of my life, and a lot of small town papers have a little bit of a political bias one way or the other. I'm not sure that it's making a huge impact, but it is concerning that it's not going through a standard editorial process necessarily. I mean, that's definitely a big issue, but I'm not sure that that all these papers were this bastion of impartiality, and now they're becoming more conservative. Mm-hmm. I just don't know that that's the case.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. All right, one more, and then we'll move on.
Oh, sure, yeah. I can pass on, what I mentioned, the IGPA project, and also how to subscribe to our newsletter if you're interested. I'm not opposed to spreading that around as well.
Get some good business here, go. All right, great. Well, thank you very much, and we will hear again